On a recent visit to pick up some material from Trinity Innovations, I spent some time with Chris Leffel to ask some questions about colored MDF. This is great information whether you're using MDF for a workshop or just trying to learn more about the material itself. This is specific to colored MDF, but many of these answers apply to MDF in general. So if you haven't really been familiar with MDF before or really understood what it is, this is a great video to kind of learn more.
So my name is Chris Leffel. I'm the owner of Trinity Innovations. We're located in Northern California. Our warehouse is in a kind of a remote area called Loyalton, and our offices are in Roseville, California.
So I've got a list of questions that is both things that Chris has mentioned before and that I've come up with as I've been thinking about using MDF for my projects. So we're going to go through and get some answers to those questions. You've got a Valchromat and a FibraColor. What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so there's 5 main manufacturers of colored MDF worldwide. 4 of them are in Europe, one's in Korea. We deal with 3 of them. So the brand that probably everybody's heard of is Valchromat, which is made in Portugal. So that is one of the brands that we import. The other brand, the main brand that we bring in is called FibraColor, made by Finsa, and they're out of Spain. So really, the differences are this, basically. On the Valchromat side, they use a melamine fortifier in their resin system, which does a couple things. It increases moisture resistance a little bit. I know we get a lot of questions for people saying, oh, well, I can use this outside because their website says that it's waterproof or whatever. Well, it's not. And the North American standards for moisture resistant are pretty stringent in terms of the tests that it has to perform and pass. While Valchromat does show better thickness swell and lineal expansion properties than a standard MDF would, it's not enough to meet the grade MR10 or MR30 or MR50 that we have here in North America. The other thing, though, that the melamine does is it really helps with machinability. When you run this stuff through a table saw, it's going to cut like butter. Also, part of that is the homogeneous density profile. So again, in a lot of MDF that you would buy at Home Depot, just the commodity MDF, the core density is going to be a lot lower than the surface density is. And so if you're routing and you're trying to finish that edge, it's a labor to get it to look right. Whereas the Valchromat and the FibraColor, for that matter, have a much more homogeneous density profile. So the density in the core is higher. So again, when you machine it, when you route it, you're going to see a product that is really easy to finish, not as much labor. There are some edge sealing techniques that we've developed that work really well with this stuff, particularly if you're going to clear coat on the top of that. But that is one of the main differences, I would say, between the 2 products. The other difference is that the FibraColor in black particularly is the blackest black MDF that we've seen on the market. They go out of their way to make sure that there's very few, if no, unpigmented fibers when they add the pigments to the wood before they make the board. The Valchromat product, you do see those fibers, and I think part of that is on purpose. I think they want that kind of that organic look in their product. So it's really we get customers that like both. They either want the blackest black they can get, or they want that Valchromat with that fiber showing through.
So now we've got the 2 pieces here. This is Valchromat here, and
yep.
You won't be able to see it in the camera. There are small fibers. It looks like it's little wood fibers in there, and it's actually not unappealing. And it would be really good if you were doing something where you wanted to sort of hide some cosmetic defects like dust and things like that. This is the FibraColor, right?
FibraColor, yep.
Yeah. And it's just deep black. There are almost none in there. And it's, the edge, even on the edges, it reveals the same. They look the same they feel the same in terms of density and everything. It's just a blacker black. When I first spoke to you, I think one of my questions was, does that pigmentation or that dye, at that time I wasn't familiar, is that going to bleed off? If I take a nice piece of white oak and run it over that, is it going to come off on there? And you said no. It's a pigment. It's in the material, and that's what's nice about using it on workbenches or other things where you might have contact with other.
The one thing I would say, though, particularly with the darker colors like black or a dark gray, is make sure you do a good job dust collecting, because the dust is pretty fine. And if you do get that on a light piece of veneer, you're going to have to.
It's a dirt.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to either have to sand it or really brush it off good to remove that darker dust.
Shipping this is challenging because it's heavy and it's big. So talk to me a little bit about if I'm a do-it-yourselfer, or I'm doing a smaller project and I've got a handful of panels.
Yeah.
What's entailed?
Yeah, we get dozens of calls a month from people either seeing workbench plans online or some other type of project. And as you said, this stuff is big and it's heavy. When we ship board on pallets to commercial shops and that kind of thing, they're buying 5, 10, 15, 20 sheets or more at a time. So for them to pay the freight bill of $400 or $500, it makes sense because you spread it out over that board. But if somebody just wants one sheet of 3/4, 4x8, we can ship it, but you're going to pay double or triple the cost in freight that the board's worth. Mm-hmm. So it just doesn't make sense for most people. When you get up to 3 or 4 sheets, it starts to make sense. But the other thing when we ship pallets is you have to have a forklift to unload it. So again, most do-it-yourselfers don't have a forklift in their garage. Yeah. So, and we cannot ship a 4x8 pallet to a residential location because they'll use a lift gate, but an 8-foot pallet doesn't fit on their lift gate. It's too long. So there's a safety issue, which is why a lot of the LTL carriers, if it's got to go to a dock or some other type of commercial situation. So what we'll do is we can ship that pallet to the nearest terminal that's nearest to that customer, and then they can go in and pick it up themselves with their pickup or whatever. Okay. And that seems to work out pretty good.
Great. It seems like an opportunity if you've got somebody in the area that does woodworking or something to team up and buy 6, 7 sheets of it together and then disseminate that.
That's the perfect scenario. Is doing exactly that. The other thing I would say when it comes to shipping to do-it-yourselfers, the program that we started 4 or 5 years ago is we'll actually cut this board down to smaller sizes that we can UPS.
I saw that on your website. So you have varying form factors, and you can.
Right. Yeah. So the biggest piece that we'll ship is roughly a 2-foot by 4-foot. Okay. This product comes 48 by 96. So when we cut a panel, we're going to lose saw kerf and that kind of thing. And we're not a cabinet shop, so I don't profess that we're going to have super tight, tolerances. I think what we publish is an 1/8 of an inch tolerance on our cut to size. But yeah, I mean that's if you can use something of that size or smaller, it's easy to ship UPS. And we've got special boxes for that and that kind of thing.
And I know I ordered a sample to get started with you, and I got it just a 1x1, and that was even really helpful. I could see the difference in those FibraColor and Valchromat surfaces. I could machine it, I could cut it. So like if you're actually going to think about it, you might just order a panel for I think like $50 or something like to your door. Mess with it, really learn it, and kind of get a feel for it. Yep. Then you'll be much better informed when you make that choice to get some. How to cut and shape. You mentioned the saw; it goes through it real easily. Yeah. Routers. I mean, it's really toolable. It seems.
It is. The general recommendation is that anything that you would be using for panel products is going to work with this material. What I recommend on a, say for a table saw blade would be a minimum of an 80 tooth alternate bevel carbide. That's going to give you the best cut. In terms of routers, again, always recommend carbide tip tools for that. Whether it's a handheld router or a CNC, and a lot of guys are, buying these smaller CNCs that they can put in their garage or their shop. And we have actually people that do laser cutting as well. Right. This lends itself very well for that too.
Great. Yeah, I've tried that with some standard MDF, and that's had good results. I've got a little bit of the thin. I'm going to give that a try with the color and may do some stuff with that. That creates kind of a burned edge, so it'd be kind of interesting to see how that plays off the colors. And it'd be fun to see. Yeah. And you did mention dust collecting, so making sure that fine, because it's got that pigment in it, it's going to basically stain or dye whatever it gets around. So so keeping that clean for future reference.
That's key. Yeah. Yep.
So you mentioned where it comes from. Just the elevator speech of how you make it, because where does it literally come from?
Right. Yeah. So it's the standard MDF process, like any MDF made. This is made the same way, with obviously the exception of the colorant that's put in. So the raw material wood comes in the form of chips, shavings, sawdust, that kind of thing. Basically sawmill residue. That material comes into the factory and then is cooked. So what that does is it softens the lignin that's holding the wood fibers together. And then that now softened wood is literally ground apart.
Okay.
Kind of like milling wheat into flour.
Say like a slurry of this stuff.
Yeah, it's dry. It's a dry process.
Oh, okay.
So everything is moved by air, but the fiber gets very, very fluffy. Very easy to move by air. So during when they blend the resin with the wood fiber, they'll also put in the colorant, and it is a pigment, not a dye, which is critical because dyes will tend to fade much more easily than a pigment will. Mm-hmm. And then now you've got dyed fiber. That fiber is then formed into a mat, which on a 3/4 board, that mat could be that high before it's compressed down to a 3/4 inch. And so it's hot pressed under a pressure, obviously. And then once the board is cured, that resin is set, board gets sanded and cut and packaged for shipment.
Sounds like our next trip is to Portugal to watch at a factory. That would be pretty cool. I did see they have some videos on their website that show some of that stuff, so it'd be kind of neat to see. Finsa, which is the one that makes the FibraColor, they do some textured panels as well?
They do. In fact, I've got a sample of one here.
Okay.
So, a lot of folks that use this product, particularly in commercial situations, a lot of it goes on a wall for decorative purposes. Mm-hmm. And in some of those cases, somebody will, CNC route a certain design or a pattern on that panel or series of panels that go together. That's certainly one way to do it. The machine time to machine a 4x8 panel is, can be hours, in some cases. What Finsa has done is they've come up with a way to emboss the panel. So this shows a sample of one of their patterns. This is not machined, so mm-hmm. This has been embossed. And how they do this is they produce the board first, and then after it's sanded and cut, then they take it to a secondary process where they've got a huge press, lots of pressure and heat that will emboss this or other patterns. And you can see those patterns on our website.
It's cool, and it's got a 1/16 to maybe even close to an 1/8 of variant. The embossing is pretty pronounced.
It is and certainly for kitchen cabinets, for example, where you've got an island and you've got an end to that island. Yeah. This type of a panel really would accent that.
Punches out and
it really does, and the light catches it. So it's not, again, as you said, it's not super deep. Mm-hmm. But it's deep enough to where the light's going to reflect off of that, and you're going to get some good effect.
A lot of shadows in there. Yeah, nice. How are they in terms of color consistency? Because you've got blues and you've got greens, and you were showing me some stuff that's old and new.
Right.
How is it panel to panel and piece to piece?
Well, it's a good question, and one that I want to make sure that people understand, because when we're dealing with a wood-based product, the type of wood that goes into these boards has an impact on color. So, for example, when they make black, they'll use more hardwood fiber in their mix than softwood. Hardwood is a darker fiber, but you're not going to see that when it's in black. Whereas a yellow or an orange or a light gray or something like that, that raw material mix is very critical. Well, through the course of a year and as production goes from lot to lot, you can have some variation within the same color.
Okay.
So, again, we tell architects and designers all the time, number one, the sample that we send you may not be exactly the color that we ship you. So be aware of that. The other thing that I've noticed is that there is good consistency from lot to lot, shipment to shipment on the vibrant colors. So blue, green, yellow, orange, red seem to be all really consistent.
They're really saturated and they kind of stay that way.
They are, yeah. Where I see a lot of variation from lot to lot is in the lighter colors. So the white, gray, even the dark gray in some cases, we can see a noticeable difference. I mean, it's subtle, and I'm not a designer, so I'm not a color expert, but that is something that I always want to make sure that people are aware of. That number one, a picture doesn't do it. Yep. You got to hold the product in your hand, and those samples that we send are going to be very similar to what we ship you, but may not be exact.
Sort of related to that was the notion of UV protection, UV stability. So fading if I've got this in front of a big window, if it's got some exterior exposure. What is that?
Well, a lot of that is going to come from the top coat that you put on. Mm-hmm. So worst case is if you do not put any coating on this, just raw. Even with pigments, they will fade over time with direct UV exposure. Again, it differs by color. The black tends to really hold on to its blackness,
Okay.
whereas some of the lighter colors, over time you could see a little bit of fading.
Right. You touched on this earlier, but within MDF there are sort of like low grades that are really inexpensive, sort of the Home Depot grades, and then there's some moisture resistant stuff you pay a little bit more for.
Right.
It tends to be harder. Tends to be, from what I understand, and it's preferred for things like bench tops and other stuff like that. People say get them moisture resistant. Where do these sit in that sort of spectrum, or are they beyond that spectrum?
Well, so again, moisture resistance is the way that we measure that analytically and objectively is with a series of tests. So one would be a 24-hour thickness swell, where we're seeing how much the panel will actually swell over that 24-hour period of time, submerged in water. We're also measuring how much absorption occurred from that water. So those are both expressed in terms of percentages, and any manufacturer is going to publish their physical data online. The other thing we measure is lineal expansion. So we take a sample that has been conditioned for a month under certain conditions, and then we take that sample and we raise it up to 95% humidity and measure on 2 fine points on that sample how much
drift you get.
of drift you get, exactly.
Yeah.
Again, expressed as percent.
Okay.
So standard, and again, it's important for people to understand that if they're going down to Home Depot, the grade that you get at Home Depot isn't necessarily the same grade that a commercial cabinet shop would be buying from a mill. There are differences there. When we get into the colored MDF, and we talk about moisture resistance, for example, a commercial grade or industrial grade, I should say, MDF is going to have a thickness swell on a 3/4 inch basis of, anywhere from 10 to 12%.
Okay.
A lineal expansion of 0.3% typically. So for the colored MDF, we see a thickness swell, particularly in the Valchromat, of around 8 to 9%.
Okay.
So again, a little bit lower,
Yep.
and a lineal expansion of 0.25%.
So it's beating the industrial rates.
It's beating the industrial grades.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So it's
fairly.
very high quality. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a premium product, so that kind of makes sense.
Right.
Excellent. And then there is XDF. That's I believe, is it Finsa that makes they make like a truly outdoor rated product?
Yes. So there's just awesome technology called wood acetylation.
Okay.
The technique or the concept has been around for decades. There's a company in Europe that has actually commercialized it, and they are acetylating softwood, mainly radiata pine, to in essence give a product that is impervious to moisture.
Okay.
50-year guarantee, even outside. 25-year guarantee if you put it in the dirt. So because it won't rot, termites won't eat it, it won't move, it won't swell. Well, what they figured out was if we take that lumber and we chip it up, and then run those chips through the MDF process and make an MDF, what do we get?
It holds those properties?
Same thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Sounds
the product is called Tricoya.
Okay.
And it's kind of hard to get here because the demand in Europe is over the
Are they doing
supply.
cladding and that sort of thing with it?
They're doing a lot of work with it. So again, in Europe, not so much here in North America, you see a lot of wood being used for storefronts, for exterior storefronts and that kind of thing, that get painted.
Yeah.
Here we don't typically use that.
Right.
We'll use
Stuccos
metal or
metals
stucco or brick or some other kind of building material. Being in the MDF business for over 40 years, I can tell you that this is a game-changing product, and it's just amazing.
That's fun. That'll be fun to learn more about that. When I did my research, just out of curiosity, there's this sort of, I won't say it's a myth, but there's definitely this, and perhaps it's historic, but there was a high formaldehyde content in building materials in general, and MDF got tagged with that. So
Sure.
you read websites and people say, don't touch it, don't use it, the dust is awful and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
From my read, there's a lot of standards now that have really, really reduced the amount of that, and they're notably advertised when I go to the commercial people up in Oregon or they've all said it. What's your read on the sort of formaldehyde content?
Well, so let's talk about formaldehyde first,
Yeah.
and then we can talk about the actual emissions. So there are a half a dozen industrial resins or glues, if you will, that are used in building products. The most common is a urea formaldehyde resin. And why is that the most common? A, because it's the cheapest one to make. B, because it cures really quick. C, it gives you really good bonds of particularly with wood fiber. The other resin that can be used is a melamine fortified urea formaldehyde resin.
Okay.
So, which is in the case of Valchromat. That's exactly what they use.
That. Yeah.
But then there are no added formaldehyde resins. One is called an MDI resin, which is a kind of like a Gorilla Glue, if you will, if you're familiar with that product. It's an isocyanate type based resin that gives you there's no formaldehyde in it, so when you press it, you have a product that a board, if you will. If there's any formaldehyde present, it's coming from the wood itself.
They're not introducing.
They're not adding resin, or adding it. The other thing that the MDI resin does is it gives you high moisture resistance, because it's basically it's a plastic bond that happens. So you can't break it down. Whereas
super glue essentially.
It is, yeah. Whereas like with the UF or even some cases the phenolic resins that are used. Will break down over time when it sees water. There's a chemical reaction that occurs, which is why a typical piece of particle board or MDF that's not moisture resistant, made with the UF resin, if it gets wet, it's going to swell up and eventually crumble apart.
Or it'll bow in humid conditions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So when it comes to the actual emissions, the North American industry has for decades voluntarily have reduced their emissions coming out of the board to near background levels.
Yeah.
So when we talk about formaldehyde emissions, it does get kind of technical.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say that the emissions that are coming out of any board really made worldwide at this point are well below any kind of background level that you would have. So there's virtually zero risk.
Yeah.
I mean, every once in a while, if somebody is super chemically sensitive and they get around a product that has been made with a formaldehyde-containing resin, they may slightly react to it. But for 99.9% of the people, it's a non-issue.
Okay.
So the other thing that's happened is, first, the state of California has come out with a regulation to limit the amount of formaldehyde emissions that can come out of particle board and MDF.
Okay.
And then the federal EPA adopted that same standard, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later.
Okay.
So there's a national standard now of where this board has to be. Again, the industry was pretty much already there.
Yeah, but it's codified now.
But now it's codified.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing with formaldehyde emissions is, again, going back to the chemistry, if you will. When you have urea, which is basically nitrogen, and formaldehyde in a certain concentration, and you blend those together and you put heat to it, there's chemical bonds formed between those two chemicals. That's what gives it its adhesive nature. During that reaction, not all of the formaldehyde is taken up in that reaction, so it's floating in the board free. You get those initial emissions that come out at the mill, because of those free formaldehyde molecules. But by the time somebody's buying that product, that free formaldehyde's gone.
It's outgassed and it's done.
It's outgassed. Yeah.
All right. And then the last one I've seen, again, there's so much information that's anecdotal on the web that you don't know what's right and not. Warnings about burning. So like when you are lasering or something, there is smoke, and it is pungent. I mean, it does create smoke. Concerns with the smoke, or when I'm done, if I burn my scrap heap, like what do I?
In my opinion, there's no risk.
Right.
Because 99% of what you're burning is wood, right? So the chemicals that are in the wood from the resin and that kind of thing, caution is always a good thing, to make sure you vent it. But I mean, we burn scrap all the time and we don't have any issue.
And it seems like, the biggest thing in a shop environment, if you're talking about shops, is dust. So like,
right.
That's, if you're worried about the little things, worry about the big things first, which would be dust collection.
Exactly, and that's inhaling dust, particularly from machining MDF, is probably the biggest risk that I would say anybody would have health-wise working with this product, because it is so fine. And you just don't want to inhale it.
And it's not due to anything that is unique about MDF. It's just small wood fibers.
It's the size.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what creates the problem. It's not toxic, but it's the size that can get in your nose and everything else. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks a bunch. I know I used to run a robotics company, and we sold robotics components all over the world to people that were in labs and engineering. But we ran a website, and we had a little storefront, and people would walk in all the time, and they'd say, "Is this it? You know, is this it?" And it's really fun to see this is what it is. So it's been really great, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I think those that are considering MDF may have started with maybe a workbench, but then they may, once they use it, because it is so easy to use, they may start saying, "Hey, I could use that in my kitchen remodel. I could use it a bunch of different places." And I know cabinet makers are using it like crazy now for all kinds of interior stuff. It's super stable. It's machinable. It's it's very accurate in terms of its dimensioning and stuff like that. So it's fun stuff. Thanks a bunch, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right.
Okay.
See you later. Thank you.